a key to resilience. So grab your seats. Shannon, take it away.
All right. Welcome all. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We're going to dive deep into the topic of work assignments today. We'll be drawing from all the book of research to describe the various dimensions of meaningful career advancing work assignment and projects, and why and how this might be relevant for the topic of WT2 this year, which is resilience, as probably you all know at this point. We hope that as people enter our session, please feel free to introduce yourselves on chat in Whova. And we hope that as people go through the session and conclude the session with us, that you all leave with some new ideas about work assignments, whether they are your own assignment or about the landscape of wherever you work. But also how important this is, are not only to resilience, but also equity. This is truly going to be a key piece for our presentation here, assignments, equity, and resilience. And we hope that you're going to leave with a few ideas, but also some actionable next steps. So I'm just going to introduce myself and let my wonderful co-host introduce herself as well. My name is Gabriela. I go by Gabby. Feel free to address me as Gabby. I am the research data analyst at the Stanford VMware Women's Leadership Innovation Lab. I have been working with work assignments and engagement and for the past couple of years. I also work with the development of young leaders, especially young women. And I'm gonna now turn into Shannon so she can introduce herself a little.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Shannon Gilmartin. I am a senior research scholar at the Stanford VMware Women's Leadership Innovation Lab. I'm also an adjunct professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering at Stanford. And I've had the honor of working with Gabby and several others over the past few years on the topics in this hour together, especially looking at assignments in engineering and tech settings. And we are really excited to be able to share with you some of our takeaways, chat and learn with you about these topics. I bet there's a bunch of time zones represented in this group today. Welcome wherever you are. And thanks so much again for being here. Back to Gabby.
All right. We wanted to start this presentation actually with a reflection. So we wanted you to take a couple of minutes just to think about a great work assignment on project you've been asked to do in recent times. What made it great and what about it felt expensive, energizing, or valuable? We're not yet gonna interact through chat, even though we're gonna do that a lot later in our presentation. But we want just you to take a minute and think about it because we're gonna use that example to discuss other questions that we're gonna have later on. And also just make sure that this work assignments or work projects, they are not necessarily like some project that you were assigned to by your manager, but also they could be a project that you engage in by yourself, or you have to convince other people their buy into this project. It could be any project that you have in mind. Just take a few minutes. Do not share yet on chat. We're going to do that in a little bit. Okay, so hope that you are, engaging your mind in this idea or keeping in mind one of the wonderful projects that you had a chance to work on in your whole career. Maybe let's go to the next question. So on the opposite end of this, spectrum of difficulty or not, we are going to go on the other end. So for you to think about, again, for a little bit, a really difficult or unsatisfying work assignment or project you've been asked to do in recent times? What about it was difficult? What about it seemed to close things off or shut things down for you, which is like kind of the opposite of the feelings that you were having while you're working on that very great assignment before. So just again, try to scan your brain or your experience in the past to have that in mind, because it's also going to be insightful for us as we move forward in our presentation here. I'm going to give you just a little bit of time just to think about that. Keep that example in mind. All right. Let's move forward to the task at hand. So here, now that we're thinking about all these projects or assignments that you worked before, we want to connect that with resilience. And we're going to be talking about links between work assignment and resilience in the rest of our session, but not only your own resilience, but also in another level, which is the organizational resilience, and potentially how those two interact with each other. Let's move on to the next one. So I guess here we just wanted to define what we are understanding and as resilient, and we are borrowing here from the concept as defined by the WT2 conference. You're probably familiar, if you've been to other sessions at this point, you're probably familiar with the way that it's been defined, but we wanted to have it as lined up with the rest of the conference as possible, exactly because of that familiarity. And we thought it would be more productive in terms of our presentation here. So I'm just gonna very quickly read it for us just to kind of level where we are all at. So for us, resilience means knowing how to cope in spite of setbacks or barriers or limited resources. We have experienced one of the toughest periods in recent history, and our collective success will depend on our ability to assess, adapt, and even thrive as we move forward. This may mean a course correction, a change in strategy, or even a conscious pause to retool. So this is what we are understanding, how we're going to connect to the work that we have been developing on assignments. Next slide. Thank you, Shannon. So connected to this idea of resilience, we can think of troubleshooting and overcoming setbacks those two pieces of resilience are particularly relevant to groups that compose a minority segment in the workplace. And on top, layered on the pandemic context, all of those groups have been faced with many different challenges that makes being resilient even more complicated, which is the type of biases that some of us know as bias in process, bias in evaluation, structural, social, and cultural barriers to advancement, all those things that make more difficult, specifically to minority groups, to advance their careers. It is interesting that a few years back, my great co-host here, Shannon, and some of her colleagues published a paper on entrepreneurial intent of engineering students. They were undergraduate students, and compared to undergraduate women and men in the business department, and undergraduate men, actually undergraduate women in engineering had the lowest entrepreneurial intent. But what was even more interesting is what mattered for them to develop such intent compared to other groups. And for that group specifically, what was more important was their ability to specifically troubleshoot and in the face of obstacles and setbacks. So the more confident they were in their ability to overcome those setbacks, the higher the intent they had to start off something on their own. So excuse me, in other words, it is not a coincidence that groups facing greatest barriers in a given setting must develop the strongest resilience. And we have been facing a lot of tests, especially now. And it's really, truly not optimal, the conditions that we are in to form the resilience to begin with. So what we're going to talk about here, so I think that it kind of just makes it even more important for us to pay attention and understand and really dive deep into the idea of resilience in many ways that we can possibly do that, especially because it's so hard to develop nowadays. So we're here to kind of give another piece of this puzzle and read and understand this concept through another angle and another way of thinking about resilience. So next slide, Shannon, please. So our proposal in this session, we're going to start off with this one, is that meaningful career advancing assignments are critical to individual and organizational resilience in these times. This is like the shorter version of what we're going to be exploring now. Now, the expanded version that we're going to get a little bit into the details of it is meaningful career advancing assignments, when designed and rewarded equitably, are critical to individual and organizational resilience in these times because they help to create fair and just workplaces. But it's not any kind of assignment in any kind of system that strengthens resilience. Our argument depends on this key piece of that assignments are designed and rewarded equitably. Meaningful and career advanced assignments, when designed and rewarded equitably, are critical to resilience because they help to create fair and just workplaces. Without these assignments, without this specific design, we would just be reproducing the very biases in the workplace that wears people down, and that kind of makes it more difficult for us to be resilient, not only at the individual, but also at the organizational level. All right, so here is basically the roadmap for our presentation. So we're gonna be, again, as I said, drawing from research, and also we're gonna talk to each other and learn from each other to provide an overview of work assignments, place in the context of our times, and discuss what we need to do to level the assignment playing field. Better outcomes for women, more equitable and more resilient organizations. And again, we really want to encourage chat conversation. We know that engagement in conferences nowadays, especially being everything online, is very difficult. So we want as much as possible that you engage with us through chat. That's how you're going to learn from each other. Next slide. All right. So we're going to talk about two aspects of assignment. One of them is meaningfulness, a meaningful work assignment or project. We're going to define that. Another one is about those high profile and career advancing assignments, those that kind of create traction. There are many different terms out there that we are aware of, and probably even more, to refer to those assignments. So they're also known as stretch assignments, glam work, developmental assignments, hot jobs. We're gonna probably touch on a couple of those names as we go through the presentation, but you might even know them in different names. But we're all talking about those very high profile and extremely key assignments that are gonna be important in advancing and developing your career. All right, but first, going back a little to meaningful work assignments. Meaningful work assignments, they can promote at least three things. A sense of connection to one's work and the people served by this work. A sense of engagement, which we can argue to be the opposite of burnout, and a sense of possibility. So instead of shutting down, a meaningful work opens up possibilities for the ones engaged in this kind of work. So today, we're going to be specifically focusing on engagement. And we came to learn about engagement through the meaningful assignments in projects that are related to employee engagement surveys at our lab. And we understood that there are really two pieces of what we call by meaningfulness. The first one, we can think about meaningfulness at work, which is when you feel connected and a member of an organization. So it's truly this meaning that is derived from belonging in this organization. But today, we are a little bit more focused on the nature of work. So in this case, we're a little bit more on the second aspect of meaningfulness, which is meaningfulness in work. So it is the type of work that we're doing and it is intrinsically motivating. And so it's where you find that sense of return and value instead of the idea of just being like one more thing that you were doing and that is taken for granted. So as a result, by engaging with meaningful work, meaningful assignments can truly create a sense of work engagement that is essential to positive work experiences. So in this sense, we can truly think that meaningful assignments are an example of good assignments. They involve personal value and a sense of being valued. So there's this two-way avenue here when we're engaging with a meaningful assignment. Moreover, they are usually a motivator. They truly tap into our internal motivation without having the need of the external motivation. Rather, so kind of like it's much more strengthening and encouraging than not. But meaningful assignment is not the only type of assignment in town. So Shannon is going to walk us through the second part of our presentation, where she's going to dive deep into the idea of stretch assignments. I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Gabby. Indeed, meaningful assignments are not the only game in town. Gabby just mapped out one characteristic or type of assignment that we want to be paying attention to, especially in these times, this idea of meaningful work. We also want to be looking at a second type of assignment. And these are what we're calling high-profile stretch assignments. And, you know, there's many terms, as Gabby's already gone through, there's many terms for this. These are the types of assignments that conceivably and actually yield some real traction on the career job ladder. Maybe they have the prospect of a promotion attached to them. Maybe they have the prospect of a bonus or a raise attached to them. Maybe they have the prospect of just more great assignments attached to them. You know, great assignment begets another great assignment, begets another great assignment. And as Gabby has said, they might be called challenging assignments. They might be called developmental assignments. Some people call them glam work or hot jobs. There's a range of vernacular that's used to describe these kinds of assignments or kinds of work projects with very little agreement, actually, in academic circles and in popular media as to the best term to describe them. But it's interesting, over the past several years, as we in the lab, my colleagues and I have talked with people about these stretch assignments, learning more and more about them. When we say it, nearly everyone kind of has a sense of what we're talking about. Everyone can kind of pull an example. Oh yeah, that's the project that the SVP knows about. Oh yeah, that's the hero project. Oh yeah, that's the one that gets all the limelight or the spotlight. So these are known in our experiences. You know, some some might have a better sense of those than others. And we're going to be talking about the dynamics of that. We're going to be using the term stretch assignment mostly in this presentation to describe this constellation of assignments. But now, lots of different terms that can be used. There's really no doubt that assignments are more than just, these high profile stretch assignments are more than just a song and dance. They're more than just lore. They actually live, breathe, exist, and have an effect. Herminia Ibarra, who is a scholar and a thought leader on leadership at the London Business School, she really focuses attention on the 70-20-10 leadership development rule. And maybe some of you attending this session are familiar with this rule. But this basically says, about 20% of our development as leaders comes from mentoring. And that's what is meant by this other people slice of the pie, 20%. About 10% of our development as leaders comes from kind of formal coursework, learning in classroom settings. The bulk, the majority of our development as leaders comes from these challenging stretch assignments. And these are the assignments that expose someone to an organization's key sources of revenue, that exposes someone to key markets, that exposes someone to key products in the organization. And in gaining exposure to those things, people gain the experience, and this is key, they gain the visibility that's needed to move into those leadership roles, and then once there, be an effective leader. And they're so important that this is what led Ibarra in 2012 in a Harvard Business Review article to really call attention to the importance of CEOs themselves looking at the assignment landscape. She wrote, women's assignments must become the #1 priority for committed CEOs who want better results with respect to gender diversity at their firms. We've been thinking about it in our work, very much building on where Ibarra was and how she conceptualized this. We've been seeing it as stretch assignments are levers of career advancement that, left unchecked, unfolding in the ether, unfolding in informal, unstructured, uncoordinated, non-systematic ways, left unchecked, can systematically favor high status groups in the workplace. Men more than women, whites more than people of color, white men more than nearly any other group in a workforce. The thing is about stretch assignments, it's kind of like a catchy phrase. It's kind of a catchy idea. Here's a graphic that we found online as we were kind of trying to understand, well, how could we think about visualizing this? This is a very engaging graphic. You don't want to be in the bored zone, in that middle, or the circle in the center, the light blue circle in the center. You don't want to be in the bored zone. You don't want to be out in the farthest reaches of the burnout zone, way in the corner out there. Those are the two extremes. Comfort zone, light pink circle there. Yeah, it's fine, but you're not growing in that zone. You're not proving your readiness for the next step in your career. It's fine, but you're not really going anywhere in the comfort zone. Where you want to be is in the stretch zone. That's where you're going to be proving your readiness for the next step. That's where you're cutting your teeth to kind of acquire the skills and the experiences and the network connections to take it to the next level. So again, there's this kind of like really catchy, engaging conditions around which, we think about stretch assignments. But what the research really shows, the academic research shows about these kinds of assignments, is that they are rife with bias. There's a lot of pitfalls that can happen in these situations. So what have we learned from the research out there? Experimental research, life history research, career history research, understanding people's experiences in the workplace in their own words. #1, different access. Women have less access to these kinds of high profile stretch assignments than do men. They are not getting them, they're not getting assigned to them as frequently as our men. They're not finding out about them as often as our men. Different scope. So women may be getting some stretch assignments, but they are smaller in scope. They are narrower in scope. than those kinds of assignments that men are getting. Maybe men are getting these big international assignments that really get them on the world stage. Women's stretch assignments are looking a little bit different. They're not quite as visible to global markets, let's say. Different leverage, and this is key. Women are seeing fewer returns on their stretch assignments than are men. They're seeing fewer career gains from their participation in stretch assignments than are men. And the gender differences that we're talking about here depend on race and ethnicity. So although the racial and gender dimensions of stretch assignments have been less studied than have the gendered dimensions of stretch assignments alone, we do see among the studies that are starting to emerge very clear race-based effects. Joan Williams and Marina Multhap recently conducted a study of lawyers and engineers, professionals in law and professionals in engineering. And in their work, they're finding that it's women of color who are least likely to be doing the glam work, and that's their word for stretch assignments, glam work, and most likely to be doing the types of office housework assignments relative to white men. In their work, there was a smaller glam work gap between white women and white men, and men of color reported many of the same experiences as women of color did, not quite the same, but many of the same. So again, keep in mind, we're controlling for profession, we're controlling for credential. These are all lawyers and engineers, and you're still finding these gendered and racialized patterns in glam work and office housework. And this led Williams and Multhap to write in another Harvard Business Review article 6 years after Herminia Ibarra. They write, women and people of color do more office housework and have less access to glamour work than white men do. If leaders are going to make a dent in their organization's diversity problems, they have to address this disparity. This sounds very familiar. This sounds a lot like what Herminia Ibarra was saying 6 years prior, really calling leaders' attention to the assignment landscape at their organizations. And the research, what it's saying is that these stretch assignments are subject to the same types of stereotypes and evaluation biases as are other performance mechanisms in the organization. Those stereotypes are conditioning leaders and managers thinking about who can do what, who can be successful in a certain kind of stretch assignment, to what end. The key with the stretch assignment is that we really don't talk about stretch assignments as systematically as we do things like performance reviews, let's say, because in part, the assignment mechanisms are so off the books. One thing that we've learned in our work and our conversations over the last few years is that kind of company dashboards around assignments, kind of formal tracking systems around assignments, very, very few and far between across different organizations. Who gets a stretch assignment and why is often an unseen process. It's an unseen mechanism. We don't really know what those good assignments are, maybe word of mouth, and that brings up the whole issue of networks, and we're going to get to that in just a second. You know, why someone gets it, how that person seems to then kind of effortlessly leverage that stretch assignment to get more great assignments. We just don't often have understanding of how that all works. It's quite ambiguous. So one of the things that we're arguing is that this is going to be a problem, especially in these times. So we have a lot of stressors on the assignment system right now. And we're speaking to themes that have been resounding in this day together. I've been hearing a lot of reference to these ideas, and these are a critical context to thinking about who is getting, which kinds of meaningful, high-profile projects. We have burnout. We have record levels of anxiety and exhaustion. We have employment changes that are so extensive, employment loss for many of us or many people in our family. There's a great amount of displacement. There's a great amount of dislocation right now. And our networks are looking and feeling very different. And this has a lot of consequence, including for our access to assignments. So, this wonderful person, Herminia Ibarra, and her colleagues actually published something very recently in Harvard Business Review in 2020, why working from home, which many of us are doing, not all of us, but many of us are doing still right now, isn't necessarily good for women. And they link it to the development of networks and access to those assignments. We know that likes attract, they write, and that the similarity principle shapes informal networks. As a result, even in work environments that have no work from home component, women find it harder to get the career benefits that come with being in easy contact with mostly male decision makers. Will working from home accelerate this underlying inequality by further reducing opportunities for face-to-face networking? Really key question. We would just say that in these times, it is very particularly hard to see, much less act on, assignment opportunity, high status projects. It's an incredibly difficult time. You know, coincidentally, Gabby, you and I were just talking last week about this idea of languishing. You shared this article that Adam Grant, a very well-known writer at Wharton, who had talked about this whole idea of how many of us aren't necessarily depressed right now, but we are languishing. And it's this sense of stagnation, a sense of emptiness. Ironically, the irony of all of this is that Adam Grant goes on to talk about how one of the antidotes to languishing is just challenging, immersive work that means something to us, that has some value for our career. And it's kind of never been harder to access some of that work right now. So we're in a little bit of a vicious cycle with respect to this good work. So we certainly don't want to end this session on any kind of note of that. Fortunately, we still have 30 minutes together. So we're going to walk through for the remainder of this session, just some ideas about next steps, what we can all be thinking about doing and learning from each other with respect to assignment structures in our organizations to advance equitable workplaces, and in doing so, more resilient workplaces and more resilient people, ourselves and our colleagues. We've just mapped out some key types of assignments. And now more than ever, we argue we need good, meaningful, challenging work to keep us going as people and as organizations. There are 3 areas that we'd like to direct our attention to in terms of making change in our organizations, in our professional structures, in our own career lives. And these are areas in which we encourage each of you after this session, far after this session, to have conversations with others in your organizations, on your teams, in your professional field. Keep the conversations going on these good assignments. We're going to be talking about defining good assignments. We're going to be talking about measuring, collecting, and analyzing assignment data. And we're going to be talking about accountability around assignment structures in your organizations. We'll be going through each one of these 3 areas, giving a few talking points, and we're going to pause after each one for some group chat so we can kind of engage everybody in a little bit of a conversation. And Gabby and I will be looking at our chats too and seeing kind of how people are responding and what they're saying. We really encourage you to jump on in to the chat. So let's start with definition. Okay, so just to recap, we have put a stake in the ground. Gabby and I have put a stake in the ground around some key characteristics of good assignments. First, a good assignment is a meaningful one, meaningful work, meaningful projects. There's a sense of value. There's a sense of being valued. It's motivating. Not every project can be meaningful, but we hope that some can be. We hope that there's some meaningful work going on or some access to meaningful work. But again, that's not the only type of assignment. We also are looking at the career advancing work and projects. These are not necessarily mutually exclusive. You can have both aspects in a single project or a single assignment. They're 2 facets of work that is good and promotes wellness for the organization and for people. In terms of the components of that career advancing work, really what the research shows is that back to this visibility idea. The career advancing work, the stretch assignments, the projects, these are not assignments that are done kind of by yourself and no one knows about them and you're just working on them all alone. These have some visibility. There's some stakes involved. People know about the assignment. Participating in this assignment is going to raise a little bit of your visibility within your team, within your organization. So there's this visibility component to this career advancing work. They also have a learning component, and this is huge. There's some novelty in there. There's some newness in there. You're learning some new kind of skill. You're gaining that exposure to new markets, new products, the revenue sources at your organization. Okay, so here is key though. This is key. As these conversations around definition of a good assignment unfold, it's critical to examine the design or definition bias in that work. So if an organization considers only one type of high visibility, high novelty work to count as a stretch assignment, to create those promotion opportunities, those opportunities maybe for a raise, those opportunities for maybe more great assignments. And there's really only one group in the workplace that's doing that kind of stretch work, there's going to be some pretty significant bias in that type of work, the type of work that's considered career advancing. What actually does that look like? This high flying work itself needs to be rethought, and or not mutually exclusive again, and or more pathways need to open up to get this kind of work. So either the work itself needs to be redesigned, and or the pathways to that kind of work need to be opened up. Here, we would like to pause for a moment. This is something that we've laid out. We would really love to hear from you, given your experiences, what you're having in your workforce, in your workplace, in your teams, looking back at your career. What do you consider to be aspects or examples of work assignments that really matter to someone's professional success or to organizational success more broadly? Please go ahead, enter some ideas in the chat, and we're going to be looking at, hopefully I can access the chat on my Hoova app. And Gabby, I know you might have it up, right?
Yeah, I do.
Good.
So feel free to jump in, everybody, and share in the chat.
Oh, this is great.
Yeah, so one of the comments here is work where you have full ownership and responsibility.
Exactly. That idea of ownership from beginning to end, that is something that we have been learning about with respect to these good assignments too.
And those assignments usually involving teamwork. It's not something that you do isolated, really tapping into the idea of high visibility. It's something that is a well-known project, not only something that you were doing yourself.
Exactly, exactly. And right now, indeed, I mean, I see a comment around them being unwritten. There is so much unwritten in relation to some of these high-profile assignments. And that's going to be a perfect segue really into the next topic here around measurement, collection, and analysis.
Yeah. Well, looking from more of an academic standpoint, is this idea of having then, there is a big impact, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Involving that such assignment. So both moving academic theory forward and lead to applicable change steps in organizations.
Yes, we definitely heard about impact. That's been a theme in how people describe their stretch assignment experiences. There's some level of impact involved. It doesn't have to be huge impact. It probably gets a little higher the higher you go up your career ladder or career rank, but there's definitely some degree of impact in a stretch assignment. This is great. Keep those in mind, and also keep, you're thinking at the very beginning of this session around really energizing assignments and projects that you yourself have had. When you think about, well, what are examples of work assignments that really matter to someone's success? Let's talk a little bit about measuring, collecting, and analyzing assignment data. It's one thing to define it. Now we have to get some information about it and analyze that information. So Gabby and I can see my video is really having some light issues in my video. Gabby and I have been thinking a lot about how to collect data on assignments. And here we're listing kind of 3 possibilities that have come up for us, starting with the idea of focus groups, having focus groups in organizations to really learn about what people's experiences with assignments are. This also helps with what to measure to begin with. How do people in your workforce actually see a good assignment in their own words? The next one would be the organizational surveys. And Gabby, you talked about this a little bit earlier. For instance, employee engagement surveys. That's a survey-based mechanism that could be very useful, high value in gathering information about assignments. Doing internal studies of who is on which team for different projects, simply tallying the size of the team, who's on the team, the functions and ranks associated with those teams for these different projects. And in terms of analyzing the data, this is going to be big. Emphasis on disaggregation rather than aggregation. We have companies say to us, we want the biggest picture possible. We want the macro look. We need to understand the data in the biggest sense. But in doing so, we are losing a sense of inequality. We have to break the data down. An example, top 5 characteristics of a hot job in your organization. What is that hot job? What's going on with that? Well, who's doing that? Cut those data by gender, by race, by ethnicity, by function, by business unit, and calibrate what you're learning by career stage and rank. Understanding that stretch assignments in the beginning of one's career may look quite different than what they are at the mid-level or a little bit later on at more senior levels. So with the analysis, our emphasis is on disaggregation, data collection, a bunch of different ideas here. We'd like to open it up to you. What are some of your ideas? We're putting down a few ideas here, but how should, in your opinion, given what you've been experiencing in your organization, collect data on what kinds of projects people are doing and how they see the meaning and value in them? Does something like employee engagement surveys resonate as a data collection mechanism? What are other ways to collect data on who is doing what? Let's take a look at our chat here. Feel free to enter things in the chat. And thank you, those of you who are in there.
Yeah, so we have this idea of, kind of learning skills that are carry over to a bigger role. And that individual managers could track this in what is related to their team.
That's right. So a managerial responsibility and actually data collection, understanding, and that's going to tie to our next topic, which is around accountability. But that's really going to tie to getting better and solid and good information about the assignment landscape. Absolutely.
And I think that this might tie back to, the idea in terms of being at the organizational level. This is more of a collective effort, right? Not necessarily, it's yes, the managers, but also the whole HR community kind of focusing in and putting attention to this.
Exactly.
And truly, especially could be a possibility with engagement surveys or other surveys to keep an eye on how things are moving. So it's exactly. Not, of course, it is a shared responsibility, and there are many players that should be truly giving attention to it.
Exactly.
There's another common for surveys and interviews, surveys for longer term comparisons, and interviews to understand how people find meaning.
Exactly. Definitely. Sometimes you need those one-on-one interactions to really get at the meaning angle. Hard to capture all of that in a fixed choice response survey. Taking it to the next level, how should organizations analyze their assignment data? I'd be curious if people attending this session have seen some good data being cut in granular, robust ways to understand the assignment landscape by gender, by race, by rank, by business unit. I would imagine that this doesn't happen all the time, in large part because we don't have fully formed data collection mechanisms yet.
And especially if the idea of, in terms of analysis, is the tendency is towards aggregation or disaggregation. How granular are we able to see those results to fully understand the various experiences that there are in organizations?
Indeed. I see also a comment here. It's hard in organizations where there is no trust. And I hope that somewhere today there has been good conversation about trust in organizations. It's true that really healthy data reporting analysis structures require a trustworthy foundation. I mean, that does seem like an essential requirement of that kind of culture, and building that trust, building that psych safety. Indeed, actually, Gabby, even with the meaning work, there's the whole dimension of psychological safety as being a key piece of engagement and meaning as well. So all of these things really interlock.
Yeah.
Let's go to the third point in the interest of time: accountability. We've seen Joan Williams, Hermione Ibarra, Marina Multhop, the calls to action. Leaders need to be focusing on their assignment landscape. What does this look like in practice? Clarifying criteria for assigning people to projects. How do people get on projects? That's got to be square one. Increasing transparency on the link between assignments and advancement, showing how these things travel together. Manager accountability in one-on-ones, and that relates to a previous comment that we saw on the chat. Not just focusing, and you'll see later, we do spotlight these high-profile stretch assignments, and we've done that in previous slides as well, but not to forget the more low-profile assignments too. What Williams and Multhop call the office housework, looking at who's doing that also, and developing some flags, some system level flags for assignment imbalance, running some internal audits on who is doing what and across which business units and how does that look. Many thanks to our managing director, Carolyn Simard, for thinking about some of these accountability measures with us. They all very much relate to other work that we do in the lab around performance evaluation, fair performance evaluation. Some of the criteria and the bullets that we're listing here are very similar to what is needed for more transparent, better, just performance evaluation systems. Turning to the chat again, we're getting towards the end here. How should organizations build more accountability around fair assignment systems in the workplace? What does accountability look like? So feel free, if you have any thoughts on that, to jump into the chat. Exactly. I don't know if this comment was made in relation to this question or something else, but really to see if teams, to look deeply if some teams have, if there's a really unequal distribution of assignments and projects in certain teams, key to keep focus on that.
We have another comment about including managers' review process.
Exactly. It's part of a manager's performance review on their equitable allocation of assignments or how much they know about what their direct reports are doing. We've certainly, talked with people who kind of say, well, my manager doesn't really ask too many questions about what I'm up to. In some ways, maybe that's a good thing. In some ways, not. Without that line of communication going, managers, there can be very little accountability in those kinds of reporting structures. Mm. Thank you for these comments, everyone. This is really, really informative. You know, we wanted just to kind of wrap up what we're saying here and tie things to resilience in our last 10 minutes together. What we are talking about in this work is really robust assignment structures and cultures, where high and low profile assignments are more evenly distributed across people, teams, groups, units. All people have access to meaningful work. Organizations do measure and track assignments, especially the high profile ones, but per the previous slide, also keeping an eye out for the office housework type activities. And depending on what they're learning, a constant feedback loop going. Changes are continuously made, tweaks are continuously made. These are living processes to optimize for equity, inclusion, and diverse voices in the kind of work that's being allocated. You know, we wanted to bring it back to resilience. And as Gabby laid out at the very beginning, we make this statement that assignments really do matter to individual resilience in the workplace and organizational resilience in these times, in all times. And the key to that is vis-a-vis equity. Our resilience, troubleshooting, overcoming, surviving, adapting, optimizing, thriving. It's not just that work assignments matter to resilience. It's that work assignments, when structured well, equitably, thoughtfully, expansively, and with accountability, lead to greater equity. And that's what matters to resilience, both to individual resilience. So one group isn't burning out, being put on all of the low profile work, and another group is getting the glory jobs, the glam work. That's burnout condition. That is optimal burnout condition. That's when the fabric is wearing really, really thin for people and for organizations as a whole. The entire organization functions better with more equitable opportunity and advancement structure. That fabric is stronger. And for some of the attendees in this session today, you may have been thinking about this piece all along. You're trying to find ways to make change in how work is allocated in your organization. For others, this might be a topic that you are newly starting to think about in a more systematic way, kind of moving from what are my assignments like? How is my career unfolded in the context of really challenging work, to how are projects working generally for everyone in my organization? What is it looking like more broadly? To close, we just had two thoughts, one question and one question for the chat, if there's more energy for chat, and one reflection question, just to kind of hear from you if you see some links between work assignments and resilience that we haven't really talked about, to have a chance to add that to the chat, to see if there's an angle here that we haven't discussed and you'd like to raise. So just want to give 1 minute for anything that you'd like to add to the chat on these links. Oh, great chat comments in here. Thank you all for these great ideas.
There is a comment in terms of the tension between assigning challenges to caregivers, right? So there may be a fear to give caregivers challenging assignments to add to their load, but actually meaningful work is what a lot of us caregivers need most right now.
Yes. +1, amplifying that. Absolutely. That's what we were talking about with respect to the languishing idea. You know, it's actually the challenging work that brings us back in. It's what is needed the most. And it's this kind of vicious cycle where it's almost hardest to see right now what those great assignments are, where the immersive work is, where the opportunity is.
Yes. And also office housework equals especially burnout leading right now.
Yes, agreed. That. We'd like to end with a reflection question. No need for any chat on this, just something to take with you, and we might have a few minutes for questions. but we wanted each of you to think about conversations, to leave this session with an idea of conversations that you might want to have with people in your team, with people in your group or at your organization, to think about new assignments. Who are 1 to 2 people whom you might talk to first as you leave this session? Who are 1 to 2 people that you might want to have a conversation with about assignment allocation and rewards in your organization? And we thank you so much. It's a wonderful session. Hi, Jerry.
Hi, I'm back. Hello.
Hello.
We do have a few questions. Here's one. How do we create alignment between what work is personally meaningful and what work is rewarded by organizations?
Exactly. Would you like to jump in, Gabby? Should I?
Whichever you want.
I think that in a way is a way of seeing this, but Shannon, you might have different perspectives, is that your personal priorities, even though we know that this is not always possible, but one way is that your personal priorities kind of align with this organization, and their major valued projects within this organization is also going to be meaningful work to you. So it's kind of this search for alignment between your ideals and an organizational ideals.
I think that's such a great point. I've had many people graduating and entering the workforce increasingly over time say to me, how can I find an organization that has my values, that, shares my philosophy on life? Really putting a great amount of emphasis on that. And that does create the trust that Jerry brought up earlier, B, this resonance with kind of what's meaningful to you. Once you establish that baseline, great things can start to happen in other ways. I'd also say and add to that I think that, we've talked about how it would be so cool to develop some kind of chart or toolkit or guidelines or something to have people really be able to name what's meaningful, what's stretch work, where the learning part, the visibility part, map out all of the dimensions of good work. It doesn't all need to be in one single project, but to really do regular audits with yourself to understand where you fall along all of those different dimensions. 4 times a year, you're checking in with yourself. You're checking in with your manager during your performance review. You have a clear sense of meaning, career advancing, and all of the other kinds of work that matters in an organization and being part of a team.
No, and maybe just on that note is that, this comes with a lot of self-awareness, and especially this might change over time, right? It's not a fixed idea, is a dynamic idea. So what makes sense to you at some point might not later on. And so it's a lot of understanding how the organization is changing with you and how you're changing with the organization, and kind of keep that in check as you develop and move along in your career.
Love that. Love it.
I also think that people do, as you're having been a woman in tech years ago, there were, moments of, I would accumulate so many tasks and jobs and responsibilities. And then, you'd want a stretch assignment and you'd be going, how can I fit that in? And that was actually a subset of one of the questions is, are certain types of labor undervalued and therefore excluded from stretch assignments?
Yes.
For example, a DEI work in organizations devalued and don't lead to career advancement, disincentivizing this work and leading to career stagnation. So people who are taking on all of these responsibilities and tasks, but they end up not getting the fun work.
Exactly.
I don't know if there's such a thing as fun, but
sometimes there is.
During a pandemic, it's like everybody's just going, oh my gosh, I've got to take care of kids and pets and all these things we had outsourced.
And that's exactly what, going back to the design bias, the definition bias, that's exactly what we're talking about. If there's only one kind of work that's being done by only one group in the organization that gets the kind of career traction, we have a pretty big design bias problem. We need to elevate that problem through all of our available channels, because that is seriously creating very thin organizational fabric.
Yes, I agree. Well, our time is up. It's 3:30. But thank you both so much. This was a phenomenal session. I think we had a lot of good interaction and engagement. We do ask that all of our audience, if you all could please rate this session, we'd really appreciate it. We will be sending out a survey after, but for each individual session, we're asking people to rate them once they've seen them. These sessions will all be posted in a few days once we get all the editing taken care of. And that's it. So we are all reconvening at 4 o'clock for our closing plenary. So thank you all so much. And thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Gabby. It was great fun.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Have a good one. All right. We'll see you all in
Bye.
half an hour.
Bye.
Bye.